سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We know that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was a shepherd, and he tells us in a hadith that all previous prophets were shepherds as well. There's a lot of wisdom behind why they were chosen to be shepherds and not camel herders, for instance, or cowboys, for instance. Among them is that shepherds have to be very tender to their flock. A shepherd has to be very kind because sheep are weak. You cannot hit sheep very hard, otherwise you risk breaking their bones and harming them. So becoming a shepherd actually allows a person to understand how to deal with people in real life. When you see sheep going in the wrong direction, you have to gently steer them in the right direction. With camels, with cows, they have different tools, they have whips, they have different ways to discipline them. However, with sheep, that is not possible. Another quality that shepherds have to have is this tolerance. Because there's no discipline involved, and because they are going to go the wrong way, they have to go out of their way, and they can't exact their revenge on them. They have to be kind-hearted. They have to know how to group them together. They have to plan ahead. These are some of the wisdoms why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes all of the prophets shepherds. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he also used this as an analogy. In a hadith that is in both Bukhari and Muslim, he states, "Kullukum ra', kullukum ra'in." All of you are shepherds. Whether you actually have seen a sheep in real life or not, you're still a shepherd, according to the analogy of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. How are you and I a shepherd? In whatever capacity you and I have, we have those underneath us. We have individuals under our care. We have people around us. These are certain individuals that we can show our kindness to. We can display tolerance to. We can ignore their excesses. And he says, وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Every one of you will be asked for their flock, in regards to their flock. Everyone is responsible for their flock. Mas'ul, you're responsible, and it also means that you are questioned in their regard. Which means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you about your flock. You are a metaphorical shepherd. Whoever is under your care, you are tending that flock. On the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask us in regards to how we tended that flock. Did we do a good job? Were we those who had tolerance? Were we among those who were kind? Were we amongst those who forgave? Or were we those who exacted our revenge on our flock or abused our flock in whatever way possible? He continues and he gives an example. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, فَالْأَمِيرُ الَّذِي عَلَى النَّاسِ رَاعٍ وَهُوَ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. A leader, a governmental position, he has his flock as being the individual citizens. He is going to be responsible for every single citizen. وَرَجُلُ رَاعٍ عَلَى أَهْلِ بَيْتِهِ. A man is responsible for the people in that man's house. Every father figure is responsible for their family members. وَهُوَ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْهُمْ. He's responsible over them, and he is liable to the questioning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their regard. وَالْمَرْأَةُ رَاعِيَةٌ عَلَى بَيْتِ بَعْلِهَا وَبَلَدِهِ. A woman is a shepherd over the home of her husband and over her children. وَهِيَ مَسْئُولَةٌ عَنْهُمْ. She is responsible for them and she is questionable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can interrogate her for that. وَالْعَبْدُ رَاعٍ عَلَى مَالِ سَيِّدِهِ وَهُوَ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْهُ. Even a slave, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says. In the era of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were slaves. Even a slave is responsible over the wealth of their master, and they are responsible, they are questionable for that. أَلَا فَكُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Thus, he says, every one of you is a shepherd, and you are going to be asked regarding your flock. In this very beautiful metaphor that Rasulullah ﷺ shares with us, we understand that we all have responsibilities. We also understand that each one of us has a leadership position, whether a grand leadership position or a very minor one in our eyes. However, in the sight of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are all the same in the sense that we are responsible, in the sense that this is part of your test, part of your life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is observing. Unfortunately, when we are given power, when we have a flock, that is usually when a person starts to oppress. When a person has power, when a person has authority, when a person has more than others in different regards, in different aspects, that is when you see arrogance starting to form in the heart. That is when you see the inclination of abuse, when you have the power to do so. It should be the other way around. Rasulullah is warning us in this hadith. He's saying you're responsible. Allah can ask you. Your position, your status, those beneath you, all of this is given to you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is going to ask you about it. But when we forget that, when we start thinking that it is due to my situation, due to my knowledge, due to my efforts, due to what I have put in, the effort that I have put in for decades, this is why I find myself in this position. That is when arrogance enters the heart. That is when we forget the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon us. In reality, it's not from ourselves, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a position that Allah has given you and I. That is when abuse happens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions this in the Quran in another parable in Surah Yunus, verse 12. وَإِذَا مَسَّ الْإِنسَانَ الضُّرُّ دَعَانَا لِجَنْبِهِ أَوْ قَاعِدًا أَوْ قَائِمًا. When difficulty comes to a human being, they call upon us. Allah is talking about humans will make dua to Allah. When we're in difficulty, we call upon Allah. Whether sitting, standing, lying on our sides, we become so desperate in all situations, we're crying out to Allah when we're in a state of desperation, when we have nothing. فَلَمَّا كَشَفْنَا عَنْهُ ضُرَّهُ مَرَّ كَأَن لَّمْ يَدْعُنَا إِلَى ضُرٍّ مَسَّهُ. However, Allah is saying when we remove that difficulty from them, when we grant alleviation, when we grant a way out, when we give them security, then they act as if they've never been afflicted before. They get that arrogance, as if they were never in that desperate situation. كَذَلِكَ زُيِّنَ لِلْمُسْرِفِينَ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. In this manner, shaitan beautifies to the oppressors. They oppress themselves by doing this. Shaitan beautifies them, their actions. What actions? Oppression. You can either oppress yourself or you can oppress others. But when we go into that state where we forget about those desperate situations that we were in, we forget about the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we forget about the position that you and I enjoy as a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's actually testing us with it. That is when we become arrogant. That is when we forget what we went through, and that is when we act out in the incorrect way. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us time and time again, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam reminds us that you're going to be questionable for all of these things. You are going to be interrogated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hisab, the reckoning. That is after we die, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to resurrect us, and He is going to tell us everything that we did, and He's going to ask us, why did we do it? This is mentioned in various ayahs in Surah Al-An'am, verse 94. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ جِئْتُمُونَا فُرَادًا كَمَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. Today you come back to us the way we created you in the first place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about Yawm al-Qiyamah. You will come to us alone. You will have nothing. وَتَرَكْتُمْ مَا خَوَّلْنَاكُمْ وَرَاءَ ظُهُورِكُمْ. You will leave everything behind. Everything that Allah has given you in this life, you'll leave it behind. Your wealth, your clothing, your family, your achievements, everything gone. You will come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just as He has created you, with absolutely nothing, not even the clothing that you and I enjoy. No money, no clothes, nothing. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is very explicit because his job is to deliver the message. And he says, and I will say because this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, to such an extent you will be resurrected with the foreskin that was removed from you on your private parts. Everything you will be as Allah first created you. Absolutely nothing. That is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also states in Surah Al-Haqqa, verse 18, يَوْمَئِذٍ تُعْرَضُونَ لَا تَخْفَى مِنْكُمْ خَافِيَةٌ. On that day you will be presented before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing will be hidden. Nothing of yours and eyes will be hidden, or yours and mine will be hidden from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing. Everything will be displayed. Allah also says in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 105, إِلَى اللَّهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ جَمِيعًا. All of you have your return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You will return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. He will tell you what you used to do. You don't have to say, oh Allah, I did this, I did it. Allah will tell you what you used to do, and He will interrogate you, and you will have to give an answer for all of the actions that you and I have committed, that we have done in favor of ourselves or against ourselves. This is our essential belief. This is Yawm al-Qiyamah. This is belief in the Akhirah. Now this belief is absolutely necessary for all of us. Why? Because it keeps us in check. When we have this understanding that Allah is watching, and one day I will have to give account for all of these things, it keeps us in check. It prevents zulam. It prevents oppression and abuse. I want to talk about abuse. I went online. I found the American Psychological Institution. They define abuse as interactions in which one person behaves in a cruel, violent, demeaning, or invasive manner toward another person or an animal. Interactions in which a person behaves in a cruel, violent, demeaning, or invasive manner toward another person or an animal. This is abuse. And this is when we are put in a position of power. Allah is watching. We think it's a ni'mah, not necessarily. Maybe, it could be, you have a position of authority, that could be a ni'mah. It's not necessarily a ni'mah. It depends what you do with it. If you abuse that power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, in whatever way that you want to do, then this is actually a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has shared with us many different prohibitions in this regard, due to the various kinds of abuse there are out there. Regarding physical abuse, Aisha radiallahu anha, she says about Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we know the ruling, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, I'm not going to hide the ruling. However, let's look at the fi'l and the action of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, ما ضرب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شيئا قط بيده ولا امرأة ولا خادمة. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam never hit anything with his hand. He never hit anything with his hand. His wife is saying, nor a woman, nor a servant. And in fact, Anas radiallahu anhu, who served Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for over a decade, he says in one narration that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam never said to me, and when he was a child, he was a little bit mischievous. Rasulullah would send him on an errand. He was around 10, and his mother said that, I want my son to serve you. So he said, okay, I'll send him on some errands if I need. So he would send him on some errands. He was 10, 11. And then he would forget, and he would start playing with the kids. Then Rasulullah would come out looking for him, and he would find him. Anas radiallahu anhu said that never in my decade of service to Rasulullah, not once did he tell me, why did you do that? Not even the question, like, why did you do this? Forget about yelling, hitting, none of that. So Aisha says, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam never hit anyone, nor a woman, nor a servant. Illa yujahida fi sabilillah. However, he was a warrior. He would fight in battle. He wouldn't sit on the sidelines. In war, yes, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would fight. However, outside of battle, he never hit anyone with his hands. Regarding verbal abuse, Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam stated, this is recorded in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, ليس المؤمن بالطعان ولا اللعان ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء. The believer does not insult others. He does not curse others. He is not vulgar, nor is he shameless. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says. So a believer doesn't use bad language, doesn't insult anyone. Even, indicating towards insults, he doesn't do that. He doesn't curse anyone. He doesn't clearly, explicitly say these bad words. It's not in his vocabulary. He's not vulgar, and he is definitely not shameless. This is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying. Meaning, if you want to be the ideal believer, you want to be a mu'min in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one who realized and actualized Islam in their heart and their actions and their statements, you should not be engaging in any of these things. Regarding financial abuse, what is this? Someone using their wit and their cunning to take someone else's wealth against their will, or manipulating them for that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah in verse 188, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ. Do not take your wealth, one of you from another, in a wrongful manner. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not take wealth in a wrongful manner. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, a warning to us, if we take anyone's wealth in the incorrect way, مَنْ أَخَذَ شِبْرًا مِنَ الْأَرْضِ ظُلْمًا طَوَّقَهُ or طُوِّقَهُ مِنْ سَبْعِ أَرْضِينَ. Anyone who takes a handspan of land from another person unjustly, handspan of land from another person unjustly, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, because when you own land, you own what's underneath the land as well. Islamically, I don't know about the law of the government, if you're able to dig a hole, or Allahu Alam, if you find dinosaur bones in your backyard, maybe they'll seize it, or gold. But Islamically speaking, if you own land, you own everything underneath. So if someone takes a handspan of another person's land unjustly, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, as far as that land goes underneath the earth, that amount will be placed on their neck. This is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying. Part of this, I'm going a little bit off topic, but this is dhulam. We need to understand what abuse is. In many cultures, I know Eastern cultures, that's my background, the Indo-Pak region. What happens is when a father passes away and he has left behind brothers and sisters, it is expected that the sister will not take any of the land and inheritance from the father. She must give it to the brothers. If she doesn't do so, she will be outcast, she will be chased away, she will be ousted from the family. This is dhulam. And if we are guilty of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that they get a share. Now you, with your action, I'm not specifically saying anyone, if you fall into this category, then it applies to you. With your action, by either implying or taking that your sister's wealth that she inherited, expect that much land to be put on your neck on Yawm al-Qiyamah. If you're okay with it, then go ahead, enjoy your land. You're going to have to pay somewhere. You took her land in dunya, she'll have it on your neck on Yawm al-Qiyamah. The muftis, the scholars, they say even if a woman, due to the culture, it's expected that the woman is going to give it. Even if she says, I don't mind, you can have the land, you're not allowed to take it still, due to the culture that was developed. So this is a warning. I've shared the hadith. Now it's up to whoever has done that, if they were ignorant of it, rectify your affairs before it's too late. So these are the types of abuse that are out there. There's also spiritual abuse. When you have people in the position, a religious figure, such as I'm supposed to be one here, someone using that authority to get what they want, someone using their position, and this is the opposite of ikhlas. We are taught the first step in Islam is ikhlas. Do everything you do for the sake of Allah. No ulterior motive. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stressed this. Allah stresses this. And when we don't have ikhlas, this is when we overstep the boundaries. We start thinking, what can I do? How can I leverage this position that I have to get the most for myself and take away from others? This is nothing short of being a monster. When we don't have ikhlas, when we do things for other than Allah, we become monsters. We seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection from such things. Now, many of you will understand why I am mentioning this. There are some imams, etc. Things often, it's not the first time that it happened, that abuse from an imam occurs. Someone in a religious position who is supposed to uphold the highest level of morals, who has read the Quran, who understands the hadith, who shares guidance with the community. Such a person steeps below the worst of people. This is very dangerous for our societies. It also makes the general public lose reliance on the ulama. I remember over a decade ago, there was some scandal with some very famous scholar. A lot of people were saying, I can never trust a scholar again. Now, this also should not be our attitude. We are commanded with husnul dhan, thinking good of people. So if I see one person acting out, it does not mean that everyone is going to be like that. However, we are not foolish people. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, a believer is not stung from the same hole twice. A snake comes out of a hole or its den and it stings a person or it bites a person. A believer is one that it does not allow themselves to be hurt twice by the same means. So we put our guards up. However, we still have husnul dhan. Right? One thing I want to share, and inshallah I'll conclude with this, is that in our culture, in our society, we actually perpetuate these types of behaviors. When we say to a person that has been abused, when they reach out to us, and we say, don't make this public, don't let others know. That's the imam, you're going to lose. It's your word against his. This is incorrect behavior. And this is contrary to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran. If you have been abused, if you are hurt, if something happens, it is your right that Allah has given you. An imam does not hold a higher position than the masses. Yes, they have more knowledge. Maybe they're practicing more. But if they're abusing, they are not practicing more. They have not actualized Islam more than you. So it is not their right that you stay silent when an imam or a religious figure says something or does something or traps someone in a certain way. I want to allude as much as possible because I never personally like saying things like this outright, clearly giving the message is enough. Anyway, I'm going to finish with this and maybe a hadith after if I have enough time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Nisa, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين. O you who believe, be straightforward, stand up for justice for the sake of Allah. Be a witness for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it be against yourself. If you have to bear witness over something that is true and it harms you, you must do so. Or if it harms your parents, or if it harms your relatives, you must do so. So when we see dhulam, when we see oppression, there is a zero tolerance to this in our deen. Now our culture, it's the opposite. The culture that we have created is this, what they say in Urdu, like Piri Muridi. He's a Hazrat, he's the great one, and I am absolutely nothing. He can step on my neck, he can do whatever he wants. This is too far. This is too much. We have respect, but if a person tears down their respect, they do not deserve our respect. Respect is earned. It is not something that should be demanded. And I'll leave you with one hadith. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam again speaks about justice. كل المسلم على المسلم حرام دمه وماله وعرضه. Three things are haram for you to take from any other Muslim, any other believer. It's absolutely haram. Their blood, their wealth, and their dignity. You cannot take the life of anyone. You cannot physically harm anyone. You cannot take the wealth of anyone. That is their possession given to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you cannot take anyone else's dignity if it is by physically harming or verbal harm or spiritual harm or mental harm. Whatever it is, this is haram in Islam. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is very explicit. Haram. Forbidden. We seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection from acting out in an incorrect way. We seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection when He gives us a position of authority, that we misuse it. We use it against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted it for. We want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with these positions of authority, not test us with it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us. وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.